I'm going to call this workshop to order. May we have roll call?
Commissioner Bennick.
Here.
Commissioner Chapman.
Here.
Commissioner Hallen.
Here.
Commissioner Ryan. Here. Commissioner Watts. Vice Chair Summers.
Here.
Chair Blair.
Here. All right, and tonight's workshop is on the water master plan.
It is.
Okay,
That's what I'm told anyways.
that's what we're hoping.
Hi, my name is Jim Swanson. I'm the Water Services Manager. I'm here as Chairman Blair answered, is to talk to you about the Integrated Water Master Plan. This is kind of a high-level discussion, kind of to get some of you up to speed on what the Integrated Water Master Plan is, how it relates to the Planning and Zoning Commission, and how it relates to the long-term plans for the City of Surprise. What we're going to talk about is kind of that first topic, and you do have the slides in front of you. Also in front of you, behind the slides, the handouts, are some of the larger pictures that we're going to go over. They're actually full-size color, so you can actually see some of that information. And I saw that some of you have some laser pointers, so if we do want to have dueling laser pointers, we can. Feel free to do that. And as we're moving through the presentation, if there is something that comes up that you want some clarification on, please let me know, and we'll try to do that, just so that we can keep the workshop moving forward and answering the questions you're looking to get answered. So again, we're going to try to hit out the information of what is the Integrated Water Master Plan, why do we need it, and the big question I think most people always ask is, do we have enough water? And then we'll talk about what's in the current master plan and how it relates to some of the decisions that have been made in the past, and then also a little bit of information on the update that we're currently going through. So the Integrated Water Master Plan is really 4 documents. And the way it's structured is we have a Water Resources Master Plan that sits on top of our infrastructure plans, our piping. So if you think of the Water Resources Master Plan, it's really about what strategies do we want to employ to meet our demands for the future growth. And then once we decide on those strategies, we'll actually then build the pipe system. So right now, the city right now has a structure based on wastewater pipes, which are generally thought of as the green pipes or the sewer pipes. We have the reclaimed water lines, which are thought of again as the non-potable or the purple pipes. And we have the drinking water lines, which are again the blue lines, which would come to your house and serve you direct potable water. And you'll see this graphic a little later as we move through the presentation also. The big question of, why do we need this plan? Well, why we need it is it's a planning document. So just like the city has the strategic plan and the general plan, our Water Resources Master Plan, our infrastructure master plans, are based on those plans. So at the very top is the strategic plan. Where does the city want to go strategically? Below that is our general plan. And what we take from the general plan, we in Water Services, is we really focus on 2 real major components. That which is the land use planning, so the densities, where commercial is, the number of homes, high density, low density, rural residential. And then we also take from the general plan to build our Water Resources Master Plan, we take the landscape plan. So again, what kind of landscape do we want to see as we move through the city and as we grow out for build out? And then from there, whenever we submit or whenever it gets submitted to the Planning and Zoning Commission plans for new development, those plans then are used to come up with development master plans. So for example, you might have Sierra Montana might come into the city. So what we would do is when they submit their PADs and all of their planning documents, we also require them to submit a development master plan. That development master plan is specific to Sierra Montana, but it's based on the guidelines and the direction that we've identified in the Water Resources Master Plan and the Infrastructure Master Plan. Does that make sense? Sometimes that connection is hard for people to understand. That's probably the way I say it. But here's the big $60,000 question. Do we have enough water? So as you look out to the build-out scenario over here on the far right-hand side, you can see that this blue line here represents our total water demand. This line over here represents all of our supplies. And as we'll see a little bit later on, the demand is based on supplying water to all the customers, all the residents within inside the city of Surprise in special plan areas 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. It does not include SPA 6. And the reason for that is when we did this plan in 2004, SPA 6 had not been annexed into the city yet. So that's one of the updates we'll be doing to the master plan. And as you look at this,
SPA 6 is not annexed into the city. It hadn't been planned for. SPA 6 is not annexed.
oh, I'm sorry, it's not in the municipal planning area. So at the time in 2004 when we did this plan, SPA 6 was not in our MPA. It's currently within our planning area, and that's one of the updates we're doing to the Integrated Water Master Plan. Thank you for that. One of the big things you see here is our makeup of supplies. As we go through this, you can see in the right-hand column here that these supplies here are what we refer to as generally potable supplies. So these are supplies we can drink directly. So I can treat them, send them to your house, and you can drink them. This supply in the salmon color, the pink color here, is actually wastewater. So this is wastewater that you flush to us, we treat and reclaim it. We treat it to an A+ reclaim standard. From that standpoint, we can actually deliver it back to customers. But the customer in this case is not a potable drinking water customer, but a non-potable customer. So in this particular case, this would be someone who is a turf facility, a large school, commercial people who can use the water directly either in their commercial application or on their landscape out in their commercial parcel. The difficulty with this is, of course, we have to figure out how much of our potable demand can be met with our potable supplies. So that's one of the things we're doing as the update to this next Integrated Water Master Plan, is to figure out, is that potable demand, in this case, let's just say 30,000 acre-feet a year, and under our potable supplies, less than that or greater than that? Because if our potable supplies are less than that, then we're going to have to convert this non-potable supply into a potable supply. And we would do that through recharge. And we'll talk a little bit about that later on.
Could I ask, you show more non-potable than potable water. Where are we importing?
Actually, what happens is our service area, our water service area, is actually smaller than our sewer service area. So we don't currently serve all the demands within inside the city's planning area. So for example, we have actually 12 different water providers within the Surprise planning area. The major ones are the City of Surprise, Arizona American Water, El Mirage, and Beardsley Water Company. And then there's a lot of smaller water companies. So we actually get effluent from those customers because there are sewer customers but not our water customers. And that's what makes up a lot of this large pink salmon color supply.
Do these other companies then also have allotments from CAP and all that? Or?
Currently, the only water providers that have a CAP allotment are the City of Surprise, the El Mirage, Arizona American, and then there's 2 other small private water companies. All the other water companies are actually using groundwater to meet their demands. So we talked earlier that there were kind of these 2 layers. There's the Water Resources Master Plan, which is our strategy for meeting our supplies. It also talks about our demands and our supplies. And then further on, we'll talk a little bit about the infrastructure. One of the goals in the Water Resources Plan is to make sure that we can meet the needs of today and the future as we build out. And then the other thing we need to do is we need to figure out if and when demands will be greater than supplies, because we want to know when that happens so we can plan for it. There are things we can do to plan for that. We can change the demand calculations. We can go and reduce allocations. We can change the landscape allocations. We can change densities. We can change a lot of things. The other thing we can do is we can go out and buy more supplies. The difficulty with that is as the valley grows, there are fewer and fewer supplies available to purchase. The city just recently went through a reallocation for CAP water, Central Arizona Project water, and got about another 2,800 acre-feet a year. So right now we're at about 10,000 acre-feet a year. The difficulty with that is that there's not a lot of water to be had on the open market. So it does become a resource that is limited as we continue to grow, and as the valley does.
Can I ask a question about that?
Sure.
What we're saying is you have a contract for the water. Is it a long-term contract?
It is. They are generally thought of, our CAP contracts are generally thought of as long-term in perpetuity contracts. The reality is, though, they are renewable every 20 years. However, the reason I say they're long-term contracts is because the federal government and the state of Arizona are probably not going to take our CAP water and give it to somebody else. So from that standpoint, all of the cities in the valley tend to plan as that's their supply. They've paid for it. They're going to use it. They're going to have it for long-term supplies. Now, there is a supply that's available, the Indian waters. Indian CAP water is a supply that some communities are planning on getting in the short term. So they're trying to use some of those waters to meet short-term needs, but the Indian CAP water is thought to be not available for long-term supplies. Some of the major assumptions in the Water Resources Master Plan, again, come from the general plan. One of the big ones is we are trying to meet build-out for the mid-range densities. So from the standpoint, if you have an area that has a 3 to 5 dwelling units per acre, we're planning for 4. Now, the difficulty that happens here is if, as we move forward, if we start to entitle at the higher end of those 3 to 4 ranges and actually start entitling at 5, then we could over-allocate our resources or run out sooner than we might have projected here. However, what we're seeing is, as we're moving forward, the mid-range densities really represent how we have been growing in the city. So we still feel that the mid-range densities represent a good estimate of where we're going to be as far as demand and supplies. The other thing as we move forward is we try to base those demands on the actual demand from the water users. The nice thing about you and me is that we are creatures of habit. So when we go home, we tend to take the same showers, wash the dishwasher the same, do the same loads of laundry. So we can do a very, very good job of projecting how you're going to behave today and in the future. So from that standpoint, when we go to do our demands, they're based on those actual uses based on the historic. So we have a pretty good understanding of that. So that's not one of the variables that is a concern to us. One of the larger concerns is, again, it comes to the densities. Are we going to approve higher or lower? Are we really the average? What if our PPH goes up, our persons per household? What if we start to see more people coming into the city per dwelling unit? We do have a large contingent of residential high density as far as 3 to 5 single family. We also have a very large portion of the retirement community. Over time, that's going to see a large shift from the retirement community to the single family residential. So we'll see that shift in population base, which we should be able to capture in our projections based on densities. The plan, as I said earlier, does include a lot of the water providers. However, we are not planning to provide water to Arizona American or El Mirage. So when you see that we have 12 water providers, we are actually planning to supply them water. Not that we're planning to buy them out or take over those operations. It's just to say that if we were to take over those operations, we would have enough water to meet those demands. Now, if we didn't supply water to those people, they are our sewer customers, so we still would get the effluent that would come back from them. So what you would see in that demand chart we showed earlier is you would see supplies stay the same, but demands go down. So we would have a greater cushion at build-out, which again could be used for almost anything that we wanted to use it for, either changing densities, going to higher densities, redevelopment. That water would be available for those options. This is the land use I was talking about. One of the big issues that we had when we did the plan in 2004 was, you can see kind of up in this area, this pale yellow. This is rural residential. It's currently in the general plan zone 0 to 1 dwelling unit per acre. We've basically planned, again, for the mid-range densities. So if this really comes in at 3 dwelling units per acre or 2 dwelling units per acre, it's going to affect our demand and our supplies. We should see our effluent supplies go up because, again, the more houses you have per acre, the more effluent you're going to get. But at the same time, you're also going to see our demands go up. And generically, the interior demand for homes is fairly stable. It's about half of the demand that we send to the house, so half of it is used outside. So when we send you a gallon of water to your home, generally we get back a half a gallon. So from that standpoint, for every new home that comes in, it actually consumes more water than we actually get back from them. So again, one of the things we're looking at in the next update is to look at this pale yellow area and determine, can we change this to a higher densities? Do we really believe it's going to build out at 0 to 1 dwelling units per acre? So we're looking at this area to be more of around 2 dwelling units per acre, maybe even 3. Above State Route 74, which is this line right here, is planning area 6. And right now we're evaluating that at about 2 dwelling units per acre. So above State Route 74 in this rural residential, we're at 2 dwelling units per acre. Below State Route 74 in this pale yellow, we're looking to go to 3 dwelling units per acre. Now that's going to change based on when we run our demand and supply numbers. So that number might come in lower. But again, we're thinking that it is actually an increase from the current general plan. So we think it is more representative of what the growth will look like as we move into those areas.
Yeah, I have a question for you. How do you factor in private wells into this where, let's say in the northeast part of the city, you have multiple developers pooling resources to build a series of wells?
The example would be currently if you have Saguaro View and Saguaro Acres. They're one of the larger community-owned wells. As the city moves into those areas, if the city is going to supply water to those communities, we would actually purchase the water company. In this case, it's not really a purchase of a water company, but it would be the HOA saying, hey, we want to be supplied by the city of Surprise. So we would take over any infrastructure that they would have at that point. So from that standpoint, any resources they would have, the city would absorb those resources. And that would be the same for anyone else. So if we ran into a community that had excess CAP water, if we were to take them over, we would also take on those resources.
I have a question.
Sure.
When we have developers coming in with a development, they have a 100-year water supply, and their density is higher per acre than what you have projected. Do you review these? Do you determine whether or not they're a 100-year plan or not, or who?
Right now that goes through the state of Arizona. So what happens is when a developer wants to develop a piece of property, they actually have to go through the Department of Real Estate to get their approvals of the Department of Real Estate. And what the Department of Real Estate looks for is they look for a determination from the Arizona Department of Water Resources. That determination is, does the community have an assured water supply? So there are 2 ways that you can approach that. There's a certificate of assured water supply and a designation of assured water supply. The city is a designated water provider. So what we've done is we've gone out to the state of Arizona and said, we believe these are our demands for the next 100 years, and here are our supplies. Our supplies exceed our demands. So they would give us a designation of assured water supply. What happens in the certificate of assured water supply is the development community would go to the state of Arizona, DWR, and they would actually apply for a certificate of assured water supply. And what they do is they do a water resources analysis for that particular development. They say how much water is actually available, groundwater is available to this community. How much surface water, CAP water, is available to this community. And then they'll do an individual analysis for that individual community. And as long as they have enough supplies to meet their 100-year demands, they'll get a certificate of assured water supply. Now, generally what happens out here is not all of the, for example, in Arizona American does not have a designation of assured water supply. They have a certificate of assured water supply for each development. So each development has proved their assured water supply. And what happens is when that development comes in, they say, we have enough groundwater underneath our property for 100 years. But what happens is the state says you have to replenish what you pull out of the ground. So Every gallon you pull out, you have to replenish. So each subdivision or developer joins what's called the CAGRD, the Central Arizona Groundwater Replenishment District. And what the CAGRD does is they are actually the entity that would recharge that gallon that you pull out of the ground. So in your property tax bill at the end of the year, Arizona American sends to the CAGRD how much water you as an individual used. The CAGRD then turns that over to the county, and the county will actually bill you on your property tax bill, that amount that you used to recharge. And then the CAGRD will recharge that water on behalf of you over the next 3 years. So that's how you get your balance of what you have, what you take out of the ground and what you put back in. Does that help?
Raise some more questions, but yes.
Let me go back. You said that like all the yellow, you assumed one.
Actually, it's 0 to 1, so we assume the mid-range density, so a half dwelling unit per acre.
So like when we did the Chrysler Proving Ground, which is blue, I don't even know what you got allowed at that. We certainly had a humongous number of houses.
Yeah,
You go back and redo the plan then?
Yeah, in the case of the Chrysler Proving Ground, we knew that they were coming in, so we actually changed their densities to match their PAD.
So that was in,
That was in 2004, yeah.
but anything else up there wouldn't be considered?
Correct. Anything else that would come in, if they wanted greater than what the current densities are, there'd be kind of two evaluations that would have to happen. They'd have to get an amendment to the land use so they could go to higher densities.
Yeah.
But then we'd also have to figure out what that impact is to our water supplies.
So you do that for every big development up there? I mean, we've never seen any documentation, that's fine.
Yeah, what happens is when the development agreements are written, the Water Services Director, Rich Williams, will sit down with his staff and look at that and say, can we supply these people? We asked the development for a development master plan, and in that development master plan, it outlines where they're going to get their resources from, where they're going to get their water from, how many wells, how we're going to replenish that. Again, following the general plan, these were kind of some of the other assumptions in the general plan. At build-out, there was about 518,000 people. That's probably going to go up in the next update to the general plan. So again, we're trying to account for those new growth numbers in our update to the master plans. And again, you probably all recognize the SPA maps, and here's that SPA 6. Again, when this was done, SPA 6 didn't even have a name to it. It was just a yellow box. So some of the conclusions we made coming out of the Water Resources Master Plan is, as you saw, our supplies did exceed our projected demands. Again, this is based on the assumptions. So it's based on hitting the mid-range densities. It's based on the landscapes. It's based on us being creatures of habit and using the same amount of water all the time. The big issue that we had to resolve in the next update is 50% of our supplies come through effluent. So how are we going to use that water directly? And again, we'll talk about that briefly. So we've talked about kind of the Water Resources Master Plan up here. We've defined our strategies of how we want to use our water, how much we have. So now we're coming into the infrastructure plans. The goal really is to define that infrastructure for the build out of the system. So what do we want that infrastructure to look like? How many sewer plants? Where do we want those sewer plants generally located? How many wells? How many water supply facilities? How many pressure zones? Giving information to the development community and to the city about how we're going to grow so that when we get there, we can do that in an orderly fashion. This is kind of a schematic. We're going to, this portion of the infrastructure is going to move away from more of the text into more figures, more examples, so you can actually see what that looks like from an infrastructure standpoint. This schematic here kind of shows a drinking water well, a potable supply well, pumping water out of the ground. So as you pump water out of the ground, it creates what's called a cone of depression. So again, as you take more water out, the water table falls over time. So this is where the state says you've got to maintain a safe yield. So what you take out, you must put back. The next thing that you see is kind of that water going directly to the customer, in this case the residential. From there, that residential customer sends that water back to us, through the green lines, the sewer system, which we then treat at the water reclamation facility. And then from there, we actually treat the water to a higher standard so that it can be used for reclaimed. So that's what you kind of see here in this pink box is the reclaim portion. From there, we can actually use that water in several different ways. Currently, what we do is we put it into recharge basins, and that water filters back through the soil and back into the water table. So again, what we take out, we try to put back in. What happens is this is about a 9-month process. So we put water up here today in the basin, 9 months later it reaches the water table. As it goes through that water table, it gets another treatment process called soil aquifer treatment. So again, the soil helps treat that water. There are other methods for recharge that we're exploring, and a lot of these have to do with efficiencies of water. Whenever you put water into a recharge basin, this water has a chance to evaporate off and is lost to us forever. So there are 2 other methods, recharge wells, that we can actually recharge water directly and not lose that water to evaporation. So this is kind of a sustainability, a water efficiency. And then the other option is to use that water directly, and that would be sending that water through the reclaim system out to HOAs, schools, large commercials, those kinds of uses. This is another way to look at that system. So again, if you wanted to look at it and say, depending on where you start, it's all a giant circle. If you want to say that everything starts in wastewater because you're not our water customer, but you're our sewer customer, then everything starts here at the wastewater. And from there, we can take wastewater, treat it for reclaimed water, send it back to our water supply facilities, and these are the facilities which serve each individual home and subdivision. And from there, that water can leave the facility and go back out to the distribution system to be served to those large HOAs, those commercials. You also have the same component here. Up here, you have that groundwater well I showed you earlier, pumping water out of the ground, bringing it to our water supply facilities, where then again it goes out to our drinking water systems. The nice thing about this setup here is that in the summertime, it's generally thought of that people are using a lot of water outside, and we have a higher demand for water in the summer than we do in the winter because of that high demand. So we don't get as much effluent back. So what happens in the summertime, this setup here allows us to use in the summertime all of the reclaimed water directly and supplement with untreated groundwater. So therefore, we don't have to treat the water to a very high standard, so theoretically you're paying less cost to irrigate that grass. And then the other thing it does is it also extends our drinking water. Because remember, half of our supplies are potable. So we want to make sure that we have enough potable demand to meet, or potable supplies to meet potable demands. And then again, what isn't used either directly through the reclaim system can also be recharged. And that was, you saw that in the schematic earlier. This is our drinking water master plan. So again, this is a very high-level master plan to say, what would the system look like? So what you see here is all SPAs 1 through 4, and we treat basically each SPA as its own kind of water service area. And each of these little dots, these light blue dots or squares, all the light blue squares are actually water supply facilities. So that's where we have tanks, boosters, wells, and all the infrastructure to bring water to your house. The lines are actually the large distribution system. They're the large lines that bring water through the streets back out to each of the properties. And as you can see, we're supplying water, like I said, to all of those private water companies that are out here in SPA 3, 5, SPA 4, and 2. Again, this gives us the option to do that, not that we will do that. This is an example kind of how the planning works. So from your guys' standpoint, when you're approving from the planning side, all of these water supply facilities generally tend to end up inside the communities. What you see here is the Roseview Water Supply Facility. So you can see from a planning perspective, the decisions you guys make are going to affect on how we build our water supply facilities. In this case, we have a water supply facility here, and what we try to do is we try to locate those facilities to buffer them from the homes. So you can see that they're about as far as we can get away from the homes, but still stay within the community. We try to make sure that all of our facilities are near open retention areas, because when we do have to drain this tank, we don't want to flood the streets, so we can send the water out to the open retention areas. And again, it provides another buffer to the homes. The other thing you'll see is this large block wall here. One of the things we do is we try to treat these facilities as commercial sites. So again, we do have an 8-foot block wall, and that block wall is intended to match the theme walls in the developments. So again, from that standpoint, when you're defining your processes for these properties, these facilities, we are trying to meet those same requirements that anyone else would be meeting in the areas. This is a close-up of the water supply facility, and I just want to kind of go over some of the major components. So I'm not sure how many of you have been to a water supply facility or have touched them. So from that standpoint, we do extend the offer out there that if you do want to go out and take some of the tours, we can do some of those tours so you can actually kick the tires, so to speak. But what we generally see here is the large water reservoir. This site is about the equivalent of 3 to 4 dwelling units. So if you think about a typical 60 by 110 lot, there's about 4 of them in here. Over here, we actually have a well on site. So this well is actually this particular one is actually 2,000 feet deep. So we actually pump water from this well at about 1,000 feet below land surface. And then over here are all the booster pumps. So when you actually turn on your faucet, these are the pumps that actually maintain the pressure in your house. So as people take showers and stop taking showers and run dishwashers, these booster pumps cycle to provide pressure to your house. And then in here, this is our controls and our chlorination. So we disinfect all of the water with chlorine. There is some questions come up. Is there fluoride in my water? There is. There's natural fluoride in the water. This video does not add fluoride to the water. However, this facility here also has arsenic. So one of the things we're doing with the change in the arsenic rules is we'll be building in this area right here an arsenic treatment plant to actually remove that arsenic in the future. And again, we would do that as new rules come into place as they're implemented by the state and the Environmental Protection Agency. This is more of the side view. So here's a typical well. Again, you don't really see a whole lot. This is kind of like the iceberg. Most of it is below ground. You wouldn't even notice it or see it. This is kind of the storage reservoir. Storage reservoirs, even though we have 8-foot walls on our property, these storage reservoirs are 16 feet tall. So they can be seen outside the properties. We do try to shade them and set them back into the property as much as possible.
You said you drain those, and how often?
We do. We try to do tank maintenance every 3 to 5 years, depending on the quality of water going into the tank. And they're mostly drained in the wintertime when our demands are low. And then so we would slowly drain them off over 2 or 3 days into a large retention area. In some cases, we don't have to drain them off into the retention area. If there are multiple tanks, we would just draw one down and not fill it back up. In some cases, we don't have that ability, so we'll have to drain them off to the retention areas. This is kind of the wastewater infrastructure. Again, looks very similar. You see this whole SPA concept. Again, breaking the sewer into manageable planning areas. So as we move forward, we can define that for all of the areas. And again, in this case, we have 5 sewer plants. So again, right now, we're down here in SPA 1. This is the only sewer plant that is currently a regional facility that's operating. This facility and this facility are under design and will be under construction in the next year or so. We do have a facility here, a temporary facility that's currently operating, and eventually that facility will come down to this regional facility in SPA 2. Again, the concept is we want to use gravity. We want to stay as cheap as possible. So we don't want to have a lot of lift stations, so where we have to collect the sewer, pump it up, and spend more money. This system is also designed so as we move forward, hopefully there's a benefit to the city and to the developer as we move forward from a standpoint of oversizing. So again, there's that balance between one large sewer plant and 12 smaller plants. The Reclaim Water Master Plan, we don't serve reclaim water like we do for sewer and water. Currently in this plan, reclaimed water has been limited to these green squares. So if you're, for example, in SPA 1 down here, The only areas that will have available reclaimed for the large turf areas are in these green squares. So you can see there's a lot of area out here that doesn't have reclaimed. We try not to send our reclaimed water outside of our water service area because, again, it is a supply of water to us. The other side of the coin is that in those areas where we are the entire water provider, we just don't have enough reclaimed water to supply to everybody. This is kind of an example of a sewer plant. So this is actually an SPA1. There are several features you can see here. Over in this area, there's a lot of wastewater treatment process. Over here, there's some additional wastewater treatment plant process. This entire site is about 190 acres, and currently this facility is designed for 16.3 MGD. It serves SPA1 only, and as it's master planned, we have an area here set aside for an additional 8 MGD. So this facility is almost built out. The other thing that you'll see is the recharge I talked about. These are recharge basins. So I mentioned currently this facility serves roughly about 16.3 MGD capacity. We're actually operating at about 8 MGD. The recharge basins here, these recharge basins only have the capacity for about 2 million gallons a day. So what we do with our excess reclaimed water is we send it off to the HOAs to be used, to commercial sites to be used, and we send it off to farmers to be used. So again, we're trying to recharge as much water as we can, but also meet the needs of the reclaimed users. This is kind of a detail of the recharge and the sewer plant. The thing to take away from this is that we use a combination of mechanical and biological processes. So up in this first box here, we do a lot of mechanical processing to screen a lot of the large foreign objects out of the water. Over here, this is actually a biological process. We actually grow bugs that actually eat all of the solids in the wastewater. And then from there, the clean water actually comes over into this area here. And from here, the clean water and the solids are separated. The solids go through this treatment process, and eventually we haul them off to the landfill. The landfill takes this and uses it as part of its methane generation. So currently the Northwest landfill isn't generating methane, but with our solids, they'll be generating methane for gas production probably in about 10 to 15 years. The clean water actually then comes over and is now called reclaimed water. That reclaimed water goes through an additional filtration process. So again, a physical process. It's stored and then is sent out to the customers. So again, if you want to take that tour, we'll be more than happy to take you through the sewer plant, and you can touch and smell and feel everything you want at your own risk. The thing we're doing now is we're updating the Integrated Water Master Plan. And one of the things we've talked about earlier is remembering SPA 6 is not in the current master plan, so we are going to be adding that to the master plan, or at least evaluating it. We are also going to be updating the land use model. So we're going to be updating, we've been working with the community development to try to figure out how we want to develop that land use as we move further away from the developed SPA1 area into more of the natural desert areas of SPA 6, trying to create a transition as we move across the SPAs. We are also looking to expand the reclaim and the non-potable system. So remember earlier I showed you those little green boxes where we were going to serve reclaim? The goal now is that we would look to evaluate serving non-potable water, so that groundwater that doesn't need to be treated to put on grass, and combining that with our reclaimed water to supply water out to the entire planting area. So we would have basically a dual distribution system. So we would have a set of blue pipes going to your house and a set of purple pipes that would go out to the large HOA users. And we currently have that now, but the system is limited to the available water we have. The schedule for that right now is to try to hit council sometime in December of 2008 with all of the water resources and the infrastructure master plans. And then that will be the new basis as we move forward to evaluate anything that would come before you as far as future developments. So with that, I will answer any other questions you might have.
I
I
have
had a couple of questions on sort of the gross supply side, if you will.
Sure.
And one of the questions is what is the percentage of cap water versus well water that you're projecting?
At build-out?
Yeah.
At build-out, we'll have roughly about 20 or about 10,000 acre feet annually of CAP water, but we'll have about 60,000 or 70,000 acre feet of total demand. So we're at about 1/7
1/7,
CAP water.
Okay. And are you basing the supply on current rainfall projections, or there's some rainfall projections that, let's say, the 20th century was very wet, and we're going to go back to a lesser rainfall pattern?
Yeah, and that's something that would affect us on the CAP side. So as we start using more of our CAP allocation, if there is a drought on the Colorado River and therefore less available CAP water to the state of Arizona,
Yeah.
the state of Arizona has a plan to account for that. And so what happens is the farmers take the hit first,
Okay.
so they would actually get reduced in water before the municipal communities would. And
Okay.
if the municipal communities got hit, we would then go back and rely on our groundwater
Yeah.
during that time of drought.
Yeah, I guess my question is, if we have less rain here, we would have less to go into groundwater. Is there?
Yeah, there is natural recharge from the rain events that we have here. However, they're not in our calculations. So whether we have wet years or dry years, they're not considered a supply for
Okay, they're
us.
not part of the supply.
Yeah, so they're not part of supplies. They would only affect the CAP standpoint because it's part of the supplies on that system.
Okay. Do we monitor, we being the city, monitor the well depth, the water table depth?
We do. There are actually two programs. The State of Arizona Department of Water Resources actually has a program that monitors water depths across the entire state, and then we also monitor our own local situation.
Okay.
I have a question about your graph here. and
Well, here,
maybe-
let me fix
Maybe
that.
you answered it.
There.
No, the graph. I'm
Well, I
sorry.
know.
the
Now
bar
you can't
graph.
answer a question if it's not up. Not on the screen. You can't ask
That's
the
good.
question.
And what have you projected build out to be? What year?
We actually don't have a date for build out.
Is it
Um,
2030, 2040,
We don't actually have a date.
2050?
The
Okay.
way that it works is we actually take the land use plan and we take the average densities. So we don't project that we're going to build out at 2,000 homes per year. We just say whenever it happens, we would have enough water.
So just out of curiosity, you have a water demand in that last year of build out. How much is that is like drinking water versus, is it effluent water?
Yeah, reclaimed water. Yeah, this line right here. So about half of our supplies, all of these are drinking water supplies. So we can drink all of this water. This water is effluent, and today you cannot drink effluent directly. We do drink it indirectly. If you remember from the picture over here, that when we pull the water out of the ground, we recharge it and put it back in the ground. This is what sometimes is referred to as indirect reuse.
The reason I ask the question is I'm trying to understand your graph here of the density or development of the city, and if we go back 15 or so years and we start moving out to build out, it doesn't look like there's a large increase in drinkable water. Is that for a reason?
Yeah, there's not a large increase in drinkable water. A lot of our drinkable water supplies are fixed as of today. So we know what we have available to us today. So there aren't a lot of new sources to be had. And that's one of the concerns across the valley and a lot of the water providers, is that a lot of the water has actually been allocated to communities. So communities are trying to deal with this issue. As you've seen here, basically the supplies kind of stop at this point. And that's because what happens is over in here, we actually get some additional CAP water out in the future years.
So I'm not sure on your graph what part of the demand is drinkable water and all the rest.
And we didn't, and that was one of the things we did not do in this analysis, was to say how much of the water that is potable and how much is our potable demand. So we did not do this in the 04 plan, but we are doing that as part of the update to this plan. So we'll be coming back and saying, of our supply that's drinkable, call it 10,000 acre feet, we have a demand that's 12,000 acre feet. So we would be short 2,000 acre feet. And the way that we would make that up is by recharging our effluent directly. Because once you recharge it, you can now drink it.
I look forward to your updated map.
You're looking forward to drinking it?
Not the good water.
I have a question. As you put together this new plan, have you tied this back to the general plan 2030 and the whole village concept that is theoretically replacing the SPAs?
Yes, and that's one of the things we're doing now is CD is on our technical committees. So from that standpoint, we're actually getting the updated information on densities, on the landscape. The village component really won't affect supplies much, and it won't affect demands much, because how you concentrate the use within the community is kind of, the water resources are kind of blind to that. It's the same demand still, and it's the same supply. It's just concentrated in a village concept rather than an SPA concept.
But as you move from rural residential to what they're planning for these different villages, the amount of land in that pale area of rural residential is going to go way down, and you'll see more single-family home or higher density units.
You may, and that's why we're planning in the rural residential to probably have a higher density than the 0 to 1. I know you guys are short on time and up for the next meeting. I will stick around, so if you do have questions after the meeting, I can answer anything you might have. Does that work?
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. At this time, we're going to take a 10-minute break.